Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for a very stimulating, thought-provoking discussion. And it's a very simple question, and it's to Emma. I'm assuming and hoping that what you've just put up there, those slides, does that come out of the Change the Story? Is that Change the Story? Can we get access to it for those of us who'd like to think through some of that? Where can we find it?
Do you want to answer?
Shall I answer?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm answering on Emma's been working very closely with us on that. We're calling it the Guide to Prevention Monitoring. It is exactly aligned to Change the Story and the drivers and reinforcing factors. So we've aligned all those indicators to it. Before mid-year, it will be out. It's not yet public, but it's Angela, isn't it? The lights are not great. Yeah, I can email you a draft if you like. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, I think we've got one here.
Thank you. My name's Eileen Brown. I'm from New Zealand. New Zealand's just introducing some legislation. It's called Domestic Violence Victims Protection Bill. So I'm interested to know what you think of the word victims, because instinctively I have a bit of a reaction to that. The bill got unanimous support to get past its first reading, which was absolutely fantastic. It gives 10 days employment leave for people who are experiencing domestic violence, and some changes to the Human Rights Act, and some changes to the Health and Safety at Work law, and some provision for flexible work arrangements. So it's quite enabling. It's not bad at all. Has anybody got any comment to say what we should, going forward with this legislation, which could actually be quite significant by putting a spotlight on that, because we have terrible rates of domestic violence against women. Have you got any cautionary things to say, or any advice, or should I speak to you later?
Anybody like to have a go at that question?
I'm very happy to speak later. I think the one point to make is Australia is by no means, we don't have it all right. So I don't know if we could answer in terms of experience that we've already had, and therefore we can look back wisely and advise. And New Zealand, I know, has been doing a huge amount of work in this space. I know that we have been putting into place some of those workplace provisions, and there's some union support and some employer and some government support for them as well. What would be interesting, and what's interesting I think as a sort of international question, is to what extent legislation can actually help us in primary prevention, and that might depend on the political and legislative regime. But if there is any way, I suppose, of getting into legislation like that, the establishment of programming coordination functions to do primary prevention, whether statutory or otherwise, that would be what I would be advising if I were in New Zealand and wanting to get primary prevention in through that. But, happy to talk afterwards. I think it's probably quite complex.
It does seem like a great moment, though, to be able to invite dialogue about what New Zealand might want to do going forth, beyond just having legislation, but creating the space for some proactive dialogic events that could actually take you to the place of a broader prevention strategy at the same time. So I'd use it as a window of opportunity.
And I think Patty is the Director of Practice and Leadership at Our Watch, and I think she wants to comment on this as well.
The only other thing I'd say to that is that we've been testing a whole of workplace primary prevention strategy, and one of the standards in that is around the sort of thing you're talking about. Are women safe at work? Do they have access to flexible arrangements, the other leave policies in place, etc.? But in order to address all of the drivers, it needs to be a whole of organisation set of standards that organisation can aim for, and if they were meeting those, then they would be addressing the drivers in a way that would set an environment where violence is less likely to occur. So those standards are in testing at the moment and were due to be released again sort of at the June 30 kind of spot, and we've been doing those in partnership with the Victorian Government. So that is something that I would suggest you say, great, that work is a really good starting point, but we have to broaden the work if we're going to really get into primary prevention and changing the attitudes and norms that our panel has talked about today.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Any more hands up?
Hi, my name is Luke van der Baker. So I run a social enterprise in Perth, and I'm currently working on 3 violence against women projects, one of which is one of the DSS-funded pilots. I guess there's a few things. First of all, thanks very much for the presentation, and I hadn't actually come across the gender transformative practice previously, so I'm certainly going to sort of have a look at that and see if there's a way that I can sort of augment what we're already looking to do with that, because I think that's really useful. I think the other thing, like one of the themes that's sort of been coming through quite a lot is the need for collaboration with practice. And whilst I'm a practitioner, I am sort of quite big on trying to generate evidence. I do work with a few universities. I'm an adjunct at Curtin. But what I'm wondering is whether or not there might be opportunities to sort of plug in, or if you have any advice on how one might plug in. Because for me, the difficulty, it's very much a community-led intervention. It's within a sort of very finite funding period. And we're pretty much, some of it is trial and error. I mean, and because it's community-led, we don't have a definition of what the intervention looks like, because we're looking for the community to define that for us. So I'm just trying to see if you've got any suggestions about, you know, as a practitioner, how might I and who might I link up with, so that we can sort of try to build that evidence base on, I guess, that one particular project in particular.
Well, I think in terms of the Australian context, it's obviously great to link up with Lara and her team, but I think the process is equally important in community-led initiatives. We've found it very useful in some of the projects we've done to actually co-learn and co-research and co-create, obviously, together.
Yeah.
And in so doing, you get a chance together to integrate evidence that does exist, or practices from other places, or ideas like concepts like gender transformative thinking or whatever, into that process. And that's one way of shaping together a community-led initiative in ways that ultimately can be both evidence-based and contribute to the evidence building. So there's a lot there, but certainly anyone here, I think, could talk to you about that approach and being quite formal about that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I mean, we're obviously working with AMROs on that because they're sort of doing the action research component. So then, I guess for me, it's about timeframes as well. And I think there's a recognition that with this particular one, while we have until the end of the year, realistically, in my mind, I'm thinking until 2022, I think it is, when the sort of federal framework, that rolls up. So for me, it's then what else we can sort of bring to the party. So we're using AMROs now, but then it's sort of long-term view, what's the next step and the next step and the next step, and who needs to plug into that moving forward.
In the research group I'm leading around alcohol and pregnancy right now, we've consciously brought in policy analysts, practitioners, women with the experience, and researchers, right? And made that the group, right, that learns together, thinks through the options together, and it works really well. And just in terms of the sustainability of it, by including the policy analysts in government, it has really made a huge difference to us, because they were part of the discussion over the years. They also are able to go and create funding streams that fit what they've learned in that context. So we're now seeing some nice benefits from, really being inclusive of those 4 groups in a very conscious way. Yeah.
Could I add just one final thing? I think, thanks for your question, because I think what it really sort of demonstrates is the very still initial stage this work is in Australia. We think that we're doing pretty well compared to most international countries, whatever. But the fact that, a program can be happening over in Perth that's completely unconnected to something happening in, Mildura in Victoria or something in Queensland, I think, and a lot of this has been short-term funded, happening ad hoc, not necessarily you know, in terms of funding and in terms of the criteria that have been used and so forth. Nothing that links practitioners together in a really consistent way and makes sure we take full advantage of the learnings from all of these programs. And I know that that's something that we would like to support more in future, but it's not there. And my colleagues Patty and Scott are certainly working with the Anne Rose grants on that community of practice, Yeah, and the community of practice is sort of there, but we haven't yet got to that point where we really have this ideal collective impact-based approach. And I just know that we're doing some professional development with Nancy and Lorraine on Monday, because there's also that tyranny of distance issue that's the same in Canada, and how can we use online platforms better and so forth. We're really just at the starting gate in a lot of it.